r/AskReddit, airplane pilots of Reddit. What was your biggest we're all ducked up moment that you survived and your passengers didn't notice? Okay, this is sort of relevant here. I flew a tanker plane in the Air Force. From time to time when at home station we'd give incentive rides to folks from around the base. People who'd won airman of the quarter for different groups or squadrons. That kind of thing. So while not a passenger plane normally, we had about 30 packs on board for a routine mission where we'd refuel some fighter jets in training and all the packs could watch them and get down in the boom pod and stuff. I'm a youngish co-pilot. The pilot is this guy, not even in our flight squadron anymore, attached to us, but I think he ran the control tower. Nobody really liked flying with him and he really didn't like flying with anybody. Hated all of the co-pilots except, for some reason, me. Probably he hated me but realized I was the only one left and kept his mouth shut. We taxi out from the tarmac to the end of the runway, and we're sitting there waiting for traffic to clear. Our base was located near a major commercial airport and depending on wind and time of day we might have to wait a couple of minutes for takeoff. Nothing whatsoever has been out of the ordinary. As we're waiting, I notice a red-tailed hawk, I think. Anyway, flying by, I pointed out to the rest of the people in the cockpit. Since we're not doing anything else, hey, look at that hawk. Like a stupid overeager co-pilot. You know, everybody looks. Everybody goes back to their conversation. I watch the hawk. I watch it fly from left to right across the nose of the airplane. Slip a bit right, turn, and take a gainer right into engine number 3. I mean, clear as day. That bird was suicidal. It turned and dove into the engine. We're not flying, but technically this qualifies as a bird strike. Nonetheless, you know how you could become super unpopular with, like, everybody say, hey, that hawk just dove into number 3. Seriously, I think the pilot was ready to choke me out. Are you ducking kidding me? You saw it? You saw it fly into the engine? Are you ducking kidding me? He gets on the radio. We gotta go back. We took a bird. Well, the co-pilot says we took a bird. Cleared onto the runway. Taxi down to the first exit. Taxi back to the ramp. Pilot keeps beaching me out the whole time. There better be a shitload of ducking bird guts in that engine or I'll ducking murder you. That kind of uplifting stuff. Reasons why he was so popular to fly with. Interspersed with beaching about how stupid I am. He keeps telling me to keep my damn feet off the pedals because the thing isn't steering right and he thinks I'm hitting the brakes. Which I'm not. But, you know, I'm not in a position to say much. Of course all the packs are totally bummed. It's not like we're just going to toss them on another airplane and do the mission anyway. I seriously don't know why we wouldn't. There were spare jets. But what the duck ever. I was an LT. This was above my pay grade. Probably so were bird strikes, honestly. So they'd missed out on the flight. I felt really shitty, to be honest. They unload the jet. We're getting ready to ride back to maintenance for debrief when one of the maintainers opens up number 3. Feathers and blood. Holy shit was I glad to see that. Back at maintenance debrief. We're wrapping up when another guy comes in. Hey, the nosy wheel bearings that thing are worn down flat on one side. You said it was hard to steer coming back. Yep, that's why. Shit, if you'd tried to land on that thing it could have seized up. I don't remember enough anymore about the details of it. This was like 2004. But basically if we'd taken off the nosy wheel might have seized up on landing. Which might have put everyone at risk if the plane had to skid down the runway to stop or the nosy gear actually snapped. Probably wouldn't have happened. But maybe I saved everybody's life. Or, well, afternoon. All that hawk did. I used to fly photographers to southern Utah and Colorado to survey land. One day I had a fuel indicator malfunction and I realized we were 10 minutes away from our engine shutting off. Landed at a small airport we passed a bit ago while running on fumes. The photographer had no idea that if we didn't land, we would have had to ditch the plane in the hot desert with no cell reception or hope of getting recused for a while. Holy balls dude, if you are still flying in an area where there is no cell phone reception and your radio won't work for whatever reason, for the love of God get a sat phone. The plans are not very expensive. Better than dying of thirst in a desert. Not a pilot, but this was the scariest plane landing I experienced. I was flying into MSP on a standard commercial airliner. In the seconds before the tires touched the runway, the plane rolled hard to the left. The plane made an equally hard recovery just before the plane's back wheels hit the runway. The sequence of events was boom, boom. The plane landed safely. As the passengers were disembarking, one of the pilots stood outside the cockpit door pale and sweating. He shook every passenger's hand on the way out. I don't know much about aviation, but I always thought that plane just barely avoided a crash landing that day. I spent 10 years fighting forest fires with the British Columbia Ministry of Forests on the ground. I'm not a pilot. We're on a fire up in northern BC, late in the season. Just trying to get it done so we can put a pin in the air. The helicopter we've been flying in has a sticky tail boom door light in the cockpit. Tail booms can be hollow in larger machines. You put equipment back there. Chainsaws, water pumps, hose, backpacks, fuel cans. All week we've been loading the thing up to the gills. It holds 9 firefighters and all their associated gear. So needless to say, the tail boom is packed every day with things that you do not want falling out while in flight and sailing right into the tail rotor. And all week every time we're ready to take off, this stupid light in the cockpit goes off. And someone at the door seat has to get out and go back there and make sure that yes, the door is actually closed. Well, it's been a long couple weeks. We get in, go to take off, and the light goes off again. I'm sitting in the second front seat next to the pilot and he looks at me and says something to the effect of "Holy Christ, the boom door again." Well, what do you figure? Should we check? I sigh. I just want to go for a rip over the trees and get this day done so we can go home. But it's not me that has to get out. It's the rookie who is sat in the rear door seat. So I say, "Duck, we should just go. But let's check it anyways. Hey back there, whoever was last at the door. Get out and double check it, okay?" Everyone sighs. Rookie gets unbuckled. Gets out to check. We wait. Helicopter is idling. He gets back in. Gets his seatbelt on. Gets his headset on. He's somehow both red and white in the face at the same time. Yep, the rear door was open. I closed it. We're good to go. Rookie was the last one at the door. Had we taken off, everything in that tail boom would have rattled its way out, careened through the tail rotor, and sent us into the ground in a spin. There were 9 of us on board, including the pilot. We all just kept that one to ourselves. From then on we had a rule. 2 people at the door. 1 guy holds. 1 guy loads. Guy who holds the door closes it. That's his only job. My uncle was an airplane pilot and trainer for decades. He also built small single-engine prop planes for himself and others. He crashed 2 of them. I think both times he ran out of gas while flying. I asked him, "How the duck do you do that? Can't you check your gas gauge?" But these small planes don't have gas gauges. You fill them up and know how long they run for. But if you have a leak in your gas lines, then you run out of gas. Which he did twice. Walked away from both of them. On a side note, he also took a plane out of Cuba and they told him they were going to shoot him down. But he just noped out of there at low altitude. It was his friend's plane but had been confiscated by the Cuban government. Pilots back then were ducking real world cowboys. I wouldn't say this is a duck up moment, but it has stuck with me. I'm 17 and one time after I had finished flight training I stopped off at Double Eagle Airport to drop off my instructor. So I drop off my instructor. This was about 7 months after my solo. And as I'm stepping out to the plane, a friend lets me fly his 182 as long as I help with the fuel and hangar costs. These 2 people come up and ask if I can take them up to Santa Fe. I say yes. But I feel kinda weird. So before I let them get in I go through and change the weight and balance so that the airplane's CG is properly centered after accounting for the weight of the payload. And after we do that, I crank up and head off for the runway. About 5 minutes after taking off, I notice that the engine is sounding slightly cranky. I think oh shit, but after about 30 seconds it calms down. 10 minutes out of Double Eagle, the engine sounds moderately cranky and doesn't smooth out for 6 minutes. This is concerning. Since I don't have very many hours time I decided not to risk it. So I advised ABQ Center of the issue and asked for vectors back to Double Eagle. They acknowledged and asked if I was declaring an emergency. I've read about pilots who have refrained from declaring an emergency until it was too late, and I considered it. but decided after looking at the instruments that I would wait, since I was within gliding distance of a relatively flat area with almost no ground obstructions. I advised the passengers of my decision, and then started the turn back. I landed uneventfully, and as it turned out, some water had gotten into the fuel tanks. Even though I had checked them, I apparently didn't do it well enough. Oh well. Sometimes we're lucky enough to be around to learn about our mistakes. So after draining the tanks and refilling them, I flew the 2 to Santa Fe and came back, and the engine sounded fine. Moral of the story, always check the small things twice. I was in the Navy, pretty early on in jet training, flying the T-45C Goshawk. We were doing day FCLPs, which is basically solo carrier landing practice, but on a runway. I had 6-8 solo flights in the jet up to this point, so I was still very new. I took off from our base, flew over to the NAF, another small airport where we do our carrier landing practice, did my 7-8 or so landings, then flew back. Uneventful. After taxiing clear of the runway, I set up the ejection seat and started unstrapping myself from the seat. I reached up to release my upper crotch fittings, and they weren't connected. My stomach dropped so hard, I felt like I was going to puke. Your uppers connect your torso harness to your parachute. Had I had to pull the ejection handle, I would have fallen to my death. Still strapped to the seat at the waist. I never told anyone, but learned one hell of a lesson. For the rest of my career, I made it a habit to verify my uppers by both touching them and leaning forward aggressively during takeoff checks. Not a pilot, but I've got a story. I should preface that my background is in electrical engineering and I've done UAV work and some airworthiness, so I know enough about planes to be dangerous. Last year I was flying out of PNS on an MD-80 headed for ATL. I'm a frequent flyer and I've got my nose in a book with my headphones on, just as happy as a clam. We start to take off and literally the second our back wheels leave the runway I feel the left engine tugging with repeated loud bangs. This is one of the most vulnerable times in a flight and my brain clicked into gear. Most people don't know this, but commercial planes can fly with just one engine. Sucks to be the pilot, but there's enough in one engine to support flight. At this point I'm staring out the window making sure we're continuing to climb. The plane is freaking silent. I look over at the flight attendants and they're staring at the ceiling. The plane leveled off and pulled a hard turn. Captain came on and said we had a compression stall and we were heading back to the airport. A compressor stall occurs in a jet engine when the air across the jet blades becomes turbulent and can actually produce negative thrust. Sometimes it's no big deal. Sometimes it damages the engine. It was the latter case that worried me. The pilot also has to land with one engine and that sucks. So after the longest 5 minutes ever we approach to land. The pilot is doing his best to keep us straight, but PNS is on the beach and there's some wind. We land and we're met by all of the emergency vehicles, included the fire trucks. A bunch of people come on the plane and I hear them saying the co-pilot saw fire in the engine. As they're letting the passengers off the plane I see the co-pilot surrounded by a bunch of important people and he is sweating as he tells what happened. I peek in the cockpit and the captain is just sitting there eating a sandwich. That was the last flight to ATL that day, so I drove home and told my wife my flying days may be over. Too long didn't read. Engine broke on takeoff and the co-pilot almost had a heart attack. The captain ate a sandwich. Do we really want to know? Thank you, passenger. Nice try, FAA. You won't get me, NTSB. Okay, this is a reported incident and the details are online, but my guy didn't want me to link it all up. He's a retired captain and a man of many stories. He asked nicely, so I've changed the airport and airline. On approach to Vienna, his MD-81s, it's a variant of the MD-80, itself a variant of the DC-9. Nose gear didn't lock. On an MD-81, you can't visually inspect the nose gear, so he had no damn idea of the state of his wheels. The MD-80 series has really far back wings from the cockpit, so the center of gravity is really far back. The nose wheel not locking is really quite an issue. It can't keep the nose up during deceleration as easily as planes with more forward center of mass. The elevator has less of a moment. I'd have probably lost the airframe. Captain Austrian says if that nose gear had collapsed, we were doing a slam dunk approach. for first officer training, and probably should have declared a missed approach. Instead, we landed it, the gear held successfully, and the cause was found to be a broken wire to the indicator lamp for the nose gear. Not a pilot, but one time I was flying to Atlanta from a small regional airport and the first leg of the flight was a small turboprop puddle jumper to Newark. It was pouring rain as we boarded and when I sat in my seat it was soaked with water. I looked around to see if anyone else was experiencing it but it was just me. Called a flight attendant over and she said, oh, it's just the condensation from the AC. I actually accepted that answer and then realized how completely not normal it was. Called another flight attendant over and she said, oh, that's weird, I'll grab the pilot. Pilot comes, sees the puddle and was like, duck, that's not good. External inspection of the plane showed a panel and some bolts had sheared off on the previous flight. So we deplaned, and they took the plane out of service. Worst part, passengers swore at me and told me to duck myself as we all exited. Everyone was mad we didn't get to fly on a shitty broken plane. Whoa. You made it to the end? You're a ducking beast. I'll cut you a deal. Smash like and subscribe for more curated content, bruh. It's free and that's a great price.